Greetings, comrades, and welcome to How the Red Was Won, a podcast about organizing in the South, Texas fascism, and how to fight back. I am your host, Jen Big Nasty, and today is going to be another theory reading episode. So, it's June still, right? It's Pride Month, and I've been looking for like queer liberation theory, like from a Marxist or at least not a liberal perspective for a while now. And I was at the used bookstore the other day and I found this book. It is called Against Equality, Queer Revolution, Not Mere Inclusion. And it is a collection of short essays written by different queer authors throughout the years. It's divided into topics and, well, it seems appropriate that I would read from the topic. Let me get it exact. Don't ask to fight their wars. Kind of self-explanatory what that's about now. So I'm going to read two of these essays today. The first one is written by someone named Larry Goldsmith. So this essay first appeared in the online publication commondreams.org on June 7th, 2011. Okay, so this was a while ago, and it is about Chelsea Manning. In 2011, she had not transitioned yet, so it is her dead name and the incorrect pronouns. The editor of this collection, Ryan Conrad, they decided to keep it exactly as is, just to preserve the article as it was written at the time, because I think some of the points they make about being a queer man in this situation are relevant. I, though, reading this to you as not a trans person, have decided that I will not be dead naming her, and as I read it, I'm going to make a very earnest attempt to change the name and to correct the pronouns as I go, okay? It might be a little awkward, but I'm gonna make it work. I will say her dead name just once when I read the title of this to you, and I apologize if that is offensive, but I, as the editor did, I am going to preserve just the title. We're going to say it as it is, and then I will use her correct name and pronouns as I read the article. So, this came out again in June of 2011. It is titled Bradley Manning, Rich Man's War, Poor Gay Man's Fight by Larry Goldsmith. Also, the opening paragraph talks about being a young gay man that joined the army, and I am going to keep that. Not until we start directly talking about her name am I going to change the pronouns. So just stick with me and know that the whole thing is about her, so... Okay. A poor young gay man from the rural South joins the U.S. Army under pressure from his father, and because it's the only way left to pay for college education. He is sent to Iraq, where he is tormented by fellow soldiers who entertain themselves watching war porn videos of drone and helicopter attacks on civilians. He is accused of leaking documents to WikiLeaks and placed in solitary confinement, where he has been held for more than a year, awaiting a military trial. The President of the United States, a former constitutional law professor, lately suffering amnesia about the presumption of innocence, declares publicly that, quote, he broke the law, end quote. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, Amnesty International, and the American Civil Liberties Union expressed grave concern about the conditions of his imprisonment, and the spokesman for the U.S. State Department is forced to resign after calling it, quote, ridiculous and counterproductive and stupid, end quote. A letter signed by 295 noted legal scholars charges that his imprisonment violates the Eighth Amendment prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment and the Fifth Amendment guarantee against punishment without trial, and that procedures used on Manning, quote, calculated to disrupt profoundly the senses or the personality, end quote, amount to torture. The National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, the Lambda Legal Defense and Education Fund, and the Human Rights Campaign, having invested millions lobbying for, quote, gays in the military, end quote, have no comment. Of course not. Chelsea Manning is not a butch, patriotic homosexual, so central to the gays in the military campaign, who defends democracy and fights terrorism with a virility indistinguishable from that of her straight buddies. She is not that pillar of social and economic stability, only incidentally homosexual who returns home from the front to be a respectable profession and a faithful spouse and children. No, Chelsea Manning is a poor, physically slight computer geek with an Oklahoma accent. She is, let us use the word, not in a negative way, a sissy. Having grown up in a dysfunctional family in a small town in the South, she is that lonely, maladjusted outsider many gay people have been, or are, or recognize, whether we wish to admit it or not. She broke the law, the president says, and she did so, the liberal press implies, trying terribly hard to temper severity with compassion, because she wasn't man enough, woman enough, to deal with the pressure. She did so because she's a sissy, and she couldn't put up with the manly rough and tumble that is so important to unit cohesion. Like that time 3 of her buddies assaulted her, and instead of taking it like a good soldier, she peed her pants. And then, of course, she was so embarrassed that she threw a hissy fit and sent WikiLeaks, our nation's most closely guarded secrets, like some petulant teenage girl. Hey, look, they got it right there. Like some petulant teenage girl who gets her revenge by spreading gossip. This is, of course, the classic argument about gays and national security. They'll get beat up or blackmailed and reveal our secrets. And NGLTF, Lambda, and HRC, with their impeccably professional media and lobbying campaign, based on the best branding and polls and focus groups that money could buy, have effectively demolished that insidious stereotype. They have demolished it by abandoning Chelsea Manning. Why was Chelsea Manning in the U.S. Army in the first place? Why does anyone join the U.S. Army nowadays? Perhaps a few join out of a sincere, if misguided, idealism that they are truly going to defend freedom and democracy. But if that were commonly the case, one would expect to see a certain number of the more affluent classes, those who never stop preaching the need to defend democracy and freedom by military means, eager to enlist. There would have been at least a few Bush and Cheney children fighting in the bloody ground of Iraq and Afghanistan. Dick Cheney, of course, famously explained that he declined to fight in Vietnam and invoked the privilege of the student deferment 5 times to avoid being drafted because he, quote, had better things to do, end quote. The draft is now a thing of the past, for now. And the majority of those in the U.S. military are there precisely because they do not have better things to do. That is to say, there are few other opportunities available. The official national unemployment rate, now at 9.1%, masks a rate more than twice that figure for young people, generally, and more than 3 times that rate among young black men. Decent jobs are difficult to get, of course, without a college education. The U.S. manages, in the midst of an international economic crisis, to spend $500 million every day on the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. But the federal and state governments have drastically cut funding for education, and public as well as private universities have reacted to funding cuts with astronomical increases in tuition and fees. Publicly funded financial assistance to poor students is a thing of the past, except as part of the military recruitment package. Chelsea Manning wanted an education. She also wanted to get away from her family and out of her small town. Military recruiters do not spend much time in middle-class neighborhoods. They seek out those like Chelsea Manning, Poor, isolated teenagers, dazzled by the slick brochures, the cool technology, the lofty rhetoric of duty and honor and generous promises, or who see right through the hype, but know they have no other option. The military does not discriminate solely on the basis of sexual preference. In its recruitment, it has always observed the time-honored and deeply discriminatory precept of rich man's war, poor man's fight. This is the club that NGLTF, Lambda, and HRC would have gay people join. Let us leave aside for the moment the question of whether the club is a defender of freedom and democracy or an imperialist killing machine. It is in either case an institution that sends the Chelsea Mannings of the world and not the Dick Cheneys to be killed or maimed. Killing or maiming the Chelsea Mannings and not the Dick Cheneys on the other side. Whatever collective psychosexual hang-ups or perverse ideological interests have prevented it from openly accepting homosexuals, or, not so long ago, women or African Americans in integrated units, it is an institution whose fundamental design is to send poor people to die defending the interests of the affluent. We do not need Chelsea Manning to tell us that the military is an institution in defense of a class society. But her case does not uniquely reveal a seldom acknowledged disjuncture between modern LGBT politics, based as it is on the individualizing concepts of quote-unquote gay identity and quote-unquote equal rights, and the way in which political power continues to be exercised through social relationships of class. It was a complex combination of factors, a lack of economic and educational opportunities, and the absence of a community and culture where she could be herself as a queer person, that led Chelsea Manning to where she is now. These factors cannot be separated into the neat, discrete categories of single-issue politics. Organizations like NGLTF, Lambda, Legal, and HRC would like to pretend that Chelsea Manning's case is not a quote-unquote gay issue, or worse, remain silent because they know that it is indeed a gay issue, one that threatens to undermine their carefully crafted plea for admittance into the military. Addressing it as a gay issue would mean looking critically not only at the specific discriminatory policy of the military, but also at the very purpose of the military. It would mean taking a good close look at the patriotic rhetoric of equal rights and to serve in an all-volunteer military whose purpose is to defend freedom and democracy, where LGBT people can be just as virile in carrying out organized killings as their heterosexual counterparts. It would mean considering how such rhetoric hides unpleasant truths about economic domination in our world, understanding how such domination relies on structures of power embedded in social relations of class, race, gender, and reorganizing that these structures cannot be addressed individually, but must be attacked simultaneously. Organizations like NGLTF, Lambda Legal, and HRC that define quote-unquote LGBT rights as a single issue divorced from such considerations abandon the Chelsea Mannings of the world, not just to psychological torture by presidential edict, but at the entrances to universities barred to those without money, at the military recruiting stations that have replaced the financial aid offices, and at the bases where soldiers when not engaged in killing the declared enemy, learn to entertain themselves by bullying each other and watching war porn. All right. I think I got through that okay. All right, the second essay that we have today. Check out my bookmark. It's a sticker. Anyway, second essay is called Queer Eyes on What Prize? Ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It was written by Erica Meaners and Therese Quinn and published February 25th, 2009 in the Chicago-based LGBT paper Windy City Times. I think this one's even shorter. Oh, maybe not. We'll see. Okay. Queer Eyes on What Prize? Ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So we've heard that President Barack Obama is going to repeal the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy that prohibits gays and lesbians from serving openly in the military. As two queer teachers that have been working hard to arrest the militarism of education in Chicago, a public high school for every branch of the military and two for the Army, and not one of those with a gay-straight alliance for students. Side note, they just got rid of all those. At least in Texas. I don't think it's national, but Texas just passed laws where you have to have a copy of the 10 Commandments in every public high school classroom. Very normal. And they barred the gay-straight alliances or like any queer official clubs. Anyway, they didn't have one at this school in Chicago either. And over 10,000 youth from 6th to 12th grade participating in some form of military program in their public schools. We are not leaping with joy at this rumor. Our reluctance has our allies scratching their heads. Isn't this what you want? Equal right to fight. What a success for the gay rights movement. I guess this solves the discrimination problem in military public schools then. Gay kids can join up. Sure. We think uniforms are hot, but this, permitting out lesbians and gay men to enlist, was never the purpose of gay liberation, a movement aiming as tenaciously at peace as equal rights. And for us, it's clear that overturning Don't Ask, Don't Tell won't begin to address the public policy catastrophe of turning over our public schools and some of our nation's poorest youth to the military. We argue that the system of public education should remain a civilian system. This statement rests on three proposals. First, adults may choose to enlist, youth cannot. Next, schools should educate students for the broadest possibilities and choices. The military narrowly aims to prepare recruits. And last, schools should protect young people and nurture peace, but the military is contagiously violent. From the ugly revelations of Abu Ghraib, how do you pronounce that? It doesn't matter. And the rash of sexual assaults on military women by men in service, to many veterans, post-service violence turned both inward and outward. Its legacy of brutality is so vast that the Department of Defense might more aptly be called the Department of Destruction. This proposed repeal, far from any big win, offers queers an important opportunity to think about our strategies and goals. Let's not unfurl our banner too quickly. Instead, we should keep our queer eyes and organizing focused on the real prize, social justice. Yes, gays, lesbians, and transgendered folks are discriminated against and excluded from full participation in our society and its institutions, including schools. Read any report about the rates of violence against gay students or employment discrimination for out queer and non-gender conforming school staff. Military, don't ask, don't tell, enough said. And families, remember the 57% majority that passed the 2008 gay adoption ban in Arkansas? And religion, many religious colleges and universities ban homosexual students, staff, and faculty. Legally so. Add to this list the ease with which otherwise smart people, including President Obama, reserve marriage and all its attendant privileges for one man and one woman, while also claiming they are ferocious defenders of gay rights. That's a fairly self-serving stance, isn't it? Yes, gays and lesbians still have a long way to go towards achieving, let's just call it, fully human status in the United States. The push to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell is, on one hand, a no-brainer. All people should have all rights, right? But this proposal can also be understood, and it is by us, as an attempt to remap what our social justice goals as queers should be. Not the right to privacy and the right to public life, and certainly not the right to live lives free from our nation's ever-present militarism and never-ending war. Instead, lesbians, gays, transgendered, and bisexuals are encouraged to forget our historical place at the helm of social justice, justice thinking, and labor, not to mention just a few: Jane Addams, Bayard Rustin, Barbara Johnson, and of course Harvey Milk, constrict our vision and dreams, and just be happy for an opportunity to participate in a military that depends on poverty and permanent war to keep enlistment high. Let's forget repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell and cut right to the chase. Repeal the Department of Defense. What about establishing a Department of Peace, as Dennis Kucinich has already proposed? Side note, that's who I voted for in the 2008 primary. He was great, and he's a little guy. I love a little guy. Back to it. Let's pair that with bear brigades tossing pink batons and, of course, an annual teddy bear picnic. Or can we take up the Mermaid Parade as an organizing celebration, with its dress-up and float creation? Either of these fanciful and very queer forms would allow us all to play and create together, and each seems a better activity for a school to take up than pretend soldiering. Then let's organize for some real social justice goals. For starters, let's demand universal health care, affordable housing, and meaningful living wage employment that supports flourishing, not merely subsidizing lives for all. We know we don't need 6th or 12th graders wearing military uniforms, marching with wooden guns on public school grounds. We don't need 12-year-olds parsing military tanks or plotting battles. However, we could use more teens painting murals, stitching gowns, writing code and lyrics. In short, we don't need child soldiers, but we could use more young artists. A public school system that teaches peace and art with fiercely equal opportunities for all students. We can see it now. Painting classes, soccer clubs, computer gaming classes, drum kits, comprehensive sexuality education, and musical theater in every school. That's so excellently queer and so very just. Okay, so that was 2 essays. Let's see. I might read another one. Okay, one more. This one is by Jamal Rashad Jones. Let me take a quick sip of water. Okay. It was published on his personal blog in December 22nd, 2010. And it is called Why I Won't Be Celebrating the Repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Queer soldiers are still agents of genocide. So, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is looking like it will be repealed, and there will be a party in the Castro. I, for one, am not going to be one of the many queers marching throughout the streets of the Castro with my American flag, fatigues, and pink helmet shining. It seems almost ironic that the queer liberation movement, now more aptly called the gay rights movement, has done a 180 since its radical inception. If anyone were to look into the rich history of queer struggle, they would, no doubt, come into close contact with the Gay Liberation Front, the GLF. This group of radical queer groups, which crystallized around the time of the Stonewall riots, took its name from the Vietnamese Liberation Front. This show of solidarity through a name was symbolic of the fact that the GLA took a stance against capitalism, racism, and patriarchy in all their forms. Gay rights activists now find themselves crying out for marriage equality and inclusion in the military, as if these issues are at the core of what it means to be a queer oppressed in our current society, and as if the rash of media-covered teen suicides would not happen if these two barriers would be overcome. They clearly have forgotten, or didn't get the memo, about the U.S. Army being the symbol of Western imperialism, and a marriage being the backbone of patriarchy. Other issues, such as decent housing, medical treatment, and resistance to police brutality, have become things associated with people of color and other groups. Gays have obviously come to a place where these are non-issues in their minds. Queer assimilation is the sinister nature of the state and capitalism at its finest. And here we have a quote from James Baldwin. "The most dangerous creation of any society is the man who has nothing to lose." The queer population, in addition to others in the 60s and 70s, fought against the state and capitalism, in large part because they had no material connection to the state. Queers found themselves outside of the nuclear family structure and the light of mainstream acceptance. This is why you see the Great Flight to San Francisco happen. This is why you see San Francisco become a mecca of all things gay. A home was needed and a home was found. This home, ironically, is the most symbolic of the radical change that has happened in the queer population in the last 40 to 50 years. The Castro district in San Francisco now stands as the most alienating piece of land to anyone that finds himself or herself not a rich, white, gay male. It is a destination for global tourism and one of the city's biggest moneymakers. Commodities line the windows of almost every store, and you'd be lucky to find a flat here that is under $4,000. A few years back, the residents of the Castro district refused to have a youth center be built in the neighborhood because it would, quote, bring down property value, end quote. In their words, the Castro is the perfect symbol of the complete bankruptcy and co-option of the queer rights movement. Tourism and profit stand over the lives and safety of youth who desperately need to escape from their abusive families. This is what happens when the queers desire to become mainstream. It becomes an issue of who can comfortably assimilate and who can't. And you can see what happens to those who can't. My problem with the hype and pressure around Don't Ask, Don't Tell is that it distracts from the very things that the queer liberation movement was founded on. Anti-imperialism, anti-racism, equal access to housing and healthcare, and struggles against patriarchy. It seems almost irrelevant to me whether or not gay soldiers can come out in the military when the U.S. military is not only carrying out 2 genocidal campaigns for U.S. imperialism and corporate profit, but also when the war budget is draining the funds needed for almost every other service we so desperately need in this country. When I see the situation as such, not only does it become apparent to me that the queer movement must be anti-war, but also that the movement, as is, has been hijacked by a few high-powered assimilationists dragging everyone along through corporate propaganda. So no, I will not be getting my tens in the Castro when Don't Ask, Don't Tell is struck down. Okay, so great little collection of essays. Again, it is called Against Equality, Queer Revolution, Not Mere Inclusion. And let's see when this came out, because I got it used. This came out in 2014, so it's a decade old, but it's extremely relevant, and I really wanted to read specifically those about militarism and about queer people in the military, because of what's literally happening right now as we watch our government manufacture consent for more war, this time with Iran. And I've already seen tweets of liberals, right? Not just the bots, not just the annoying, I mean, they're all annoying, but people with power, people in the media, and people that like hold office, again, liberals that are tweeting things, like, oh, well, do you know what Iran does to gay people? Or what do you think about women's rights in Iran? As if that matters at all when we're bombing them. Is that why we're bombing them? Because women don't have rights, which I think is arguable anyway, when the US just literally forced a black woman's corpse, to incubate a fetus for 4 months before they cut it out of her as a medical experiment to see what they could get away with doing to women's bodies. Texas is banning everything queer, but the Supreme Court just upheld, I'm going to get it wrong, I want to say it was a Kentucky law, but it was a southern state that banned healthcare for trans youth. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they upheld that. So we're banning healthcare for specific people, women and queer people. And it's so absurd to act like the U.S. is going to be the good guy and liberate anybody anywhere, much less Iran, much less queer people, much less women. And so I'm really glad I found that book of essays, because, again, these are 10 to 15-year-old writings that are extremely relevant, unfortunately, still, because I honestly, things have just gotten worse, the struggle continues. It changes faces in some ways. Trump is president again, but Kamala Harris would have done the same thing in Iran, and I think liberals would be even more excited about it because it'd be a woman president. She's so tough. She's gonna get in there. It's literally the meme. The meme where they say the next bombs will be sent by a woman. They're literally doing the meme. And I laugh because of the absurdity. It's not funny. It's fucking horrible. But it is a good reminder about how all of these struggles are interconnected. And that, as what is today, the 22nd? We've got about a week left in June, a week left of Pride Month. We have to, as we think about what queer liberation looks like, we have to always remember that it is explicitly tied with all of our liberation, with immigrant liberation, with immigrant rights, with women's liberation, with the liberation of Black Americans, with the liberation of the working class all over the world. None of us is free until all of us are free. And I know that's a cliche and it's a slogan and it's whatever, but it's fucking true. And yeah, we have to remember that. We have to remember that we do not throw other communities under the bus to push ourselves forward. Because it always comes back around. Because it is all connected. All right, y'all. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe. Join an organization. Engage in mutual aid. Things are going to get worse before they can get better. So get ready for a long fight, because we are all in this together. Cheers.